Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Stacy Matrazo. I'm the Executive Director of the Florida Wildflower Foundation. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar, Native Plants in Urban Soils, Points to Ponder. For those of you not familiar with our organization, our mission is to protect, connect, and expand native wildflower habitat through education, research, planting, and conservation programs. Our work is made possible primarily through the sale and renewal of the state wildflower license plate. This is our old look. This is our new look. Whether you have the old or the new license plate, you are supporting our work, and we thank you for that. Funds from the sale and renewal of the tag, as well as donations and memberships, allow us to support and create projects that build awareness and knowledge of native wildflowers and plants throughout Florida. We'd like to encourage those of you who find our programs valuable to consider becoming a member, making a donation, or purchasing that state wildflower license plate. And if you do purchase or have the tag, you are eligible for a membership with our organization. Just let us know that you have it and we'll get you set up in our database. Be sure to check out our website for resources on planting and growing wildflowers, to learn where to see wildflowers in bloom, and to learn about upcoming events and much more. We're also on social media. You can find us on most platforms at FLA Wildflowers. Next month, Nicole Perna, land management specialist with Brevard County's Environmentally Endangered Lands Program, will present From Beaches to Bays, Native Plants for Florida's Coastal Ecosystems. That's on September 20th. We also have some great field trips coming up. On September 9th, we will explore the unique longleaf pine and turkey oak habitat of Bach Tower Gardens. That's in Lake Wales. And in October, we are lucky enough to have access to the DeLuca Preserve, which presents some prairie and wetland habitats and is home to state and federally listed species, including the Florida grasshopper sparrow and red cockaded woodpecker. Be sure to follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter to stay abreast of our webinar and field trip opportunities and to learn how to register. I do have a couple of housekeeping items to go over before we get started. First, all attendees are muted. Your cameras are off. If you have questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A feature to submit them. You can enter your question at any time. Yes, the chat is active, but we are not monitoring that for questions. So please use the Q&A feature. We will address questions at the end of the presentation as time permits. If your question isn't answered, you may email it to us at info@flawildflowers.org, and we will be sure to get you an answer or pass that on to our presenter. And finally, the webinar is being recorded. It will be available on our YouTube channel and our website in about 24 to 48 hours. You'll also receive an email from us when it is available with a link to the recording, as well as a resource page with links and contact information from today's webinar. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker. Brooke Moffis is the commercial horticulture agent at UF IFAS Extension in Lake County, and she specializes in Florida-friendly landscaping principles. She holds a bachelor's degree in horticulture from Tennessee Tech, a master's degree in entomology from the University of Florida, and is currently pursuing her PhD at the University of Florida School of Natural Resources and Environment. Brooke's background includes valuable landscape experience at Quartz Arboretum, Post Properties, and the Walt Disney World Company, allowing her to bridge the gap between research and practical landscape applications. Her aim is to partner with industry to create sustainable and beautiful landscapes. Without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Brooke.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today. You have so many excellent speakers, and I always enjoy listening to these monthly sessions. So let's see. Okay, so thank you for the wonderful introduction, Stacy. Like she said, I am a extension agent and I am a PhD student and I'm a mom of 2 kids. So I'm kind of going crazy right now, but I will be for the next several years. But today I'm going to talk to you about some of my passions, which is really combining nature and ornamental horticulture together. And it's interesting because I have been gardening since I was a preteen with my grandfather. And I loved pretty flowers, no matter how big, beautiful. And I always enjoyed walking, taking hikes, swimming, doing things out in nature. I'm a person that has to be out in nature as much as possible for my own mental health. But anyhow, it took me until about 3 years ago of gardening for, gosh, 20 years now. It took me 3 years ago to realize that I can link my passion for ornamental horticulture and nature together. And so I'm now working with developers and landscapers to try to incorporate more native plants and Florida-friendly plants that are drought tolerant so that we can help conserve water and we can help bring nature into our home landscapes. All right, so what we're going to be talking about for the next, say about 45 minutes to hour is I'm going to give you kind of the situation of what we're experiencing here in Florida, which I'm sure you all probably know. Why native plants? We'll talk about some of the challenges, and mainly I'm going to be focusing on soils for this presentation. I'll tell you about our study we have that's ongoing, looking at native plants and urban soils. I'll show you some of our top performing plants, and then I'll just get into some very general recommendations. So let's talk about the situation that we're facing in Florida. We have 900 residents that move to Florida every single day. And that's actually a number from about actually it was 2019. And I heard, 2021 that we had 1,100 residents that moved to Florida every single day. So I don't know where the number stands, but it's roughly about that number. Residential landscapes are the most rapidly expanding land cover types in the United States. And when we have this rapidly expanding land cover type and it's all being developed the same way, we end up with these homogeneous and these highly maintained landscapes. And with that comes water demands, of course, to irrigate turf grass and maybe some other shrubs. We've got a lot of water demands there, and we cap out in the Central Florida area at about 850 million gallons a day of groundwater withdrawals. And we're about to that level in this area. Another thing that happens with that is habitat loss. So I know this picture is really small, but I want you to just take a minute and look at the variety of plants in this snapshot. I know it's a small picture. I'm asking you to do a lot here. But how many plants do you see in this picture? Different species of plants, I should say. I'll give you just a few seconds to kind of form some thoughts. And also interested if any of you know where this is in Florida. All right, so I would say what most people respond when I ask this question is they'll say that they see about 5 plants, 7 plants, 12 plants. And my point with this picture is that there's not a lot of diversity of plant materials. I see a turf grass that probably looks like zoysia grass. I see some low growing plants that look maybe like junipers, possibly some boxwoods surrounding those pickleball courts. And then I see maybe 3 or 4 varieties of palms and live oak. And, that's about it in the snapshot. We could really load this up with a lot more species diversity and help out our native ecosystems or create almost like it wouldn't be a true natural ecosystem, but we could create kind of a native ecosystem in our own yards and landscapes. So why do I care about this? Well, this is a snapshot of Lake County. We're right in the middle of the state, and so many of your counties look like this as well. On the left, you will see that this is our what we call our trend. This is where Lake County's development currently stands. In the middle, this is our trend by 2070 if growth continues as it has been. So the red will all be developed, the protected land will all be in green there. And then if we can build 20% denser, and if we can protect our unprotected ag lands, we could have this situation on the right side. diagram there. So that is kind of the best situation by 2070. Again, if these growth trends continue, but we build 20% denser and again, protect those unprotected ag lands. So again, the stress on resources, we get loss of habitat, we get loss of ecosystem services like viewing wildlife for our mental health, pollination, which is so crucial for us as a species. And native plants really they're adapted to our environment, they're adapted to our climate, they provide a sense of place. They're very crucial to our native animal biodiversity. If we want our native animal biodiversity, anything from vertebrates, birds, lizards, oh goodness, you name it, we've got to have those native plants. We've got to have those insects too. So they're absolutely critical to the food web. Native plants are if we want to have those native animal species. Sense of place is also, I think, very important for us as a species. Sense of place can be described as the surrounding landscapes, both natural and planned, that influence the design and plant materials to be used. So with sense of place, we have these very homogeneous shopping centers. Every town in the US practically looks about the same. And, we can actually vary our landscapes, and we can have our landscapes fit in and be part of our natural habitat and have a different look so that we maintain our identity. Viewing so many of these landscapes, the modern US landscape can be kind of boring. What do we usually have? This large swath of turf grass, these foundation plants around our houses, and maybe we have some winding beds mixed in, but it can all be very boring. So native plants can help us incorporate that sense of place. And I liked this quote that I heard by Sir Jeffrey Jellicoe, and he was an architect and a landscape architect. He was a garden designer in England. And he said, the failure of modern landscape architecture is the failure to inject meaning. So let's inject some meaning into our landscapes with native plants. So the challenges that we face, there's so many, but today I'm going to be focusing on soils. And let's go back to some soil basics. This may be new to some of you may know this like the back of your hand, but this is a soil profile. So if we were to actually cut away the soil, this is what we would see. And sometimes you might see this if you're driving in a mountainous region where they've actually gone in and done some road cutting. You can actually see the layers of soil, and you can see sometimes the bedrock even there. And so what we have is we have the O horizon. This horizon has organic matter. It's usually decomposing plant, decomposing animal materials. Then we have the A horizon, and the A horizon is where that organic matter starts to incorporate into the minerals. So if you take the O horizon and the A horizon together, that is our topsoil. That's where most of our plant root growth is going to occur. Then we have the E horizon. That's a leached layer. A lot of a lot of nutrients are kind of pushed through that layer. And we have the B horizon, which is considered the subsoil. So the subsoil can get clay accumulation. It can have some really high, and sometimes really low pHs as well. And then we have the C horizon, which comes from our parent material. Our parent material is what our soils are typically formed from. And in a lot of states, it's the bedrock. So the soils forms from sloughing off of the bedrock. But in Florida, it's the rising and the falling of seas that really causes that C horizon development. And what we get is we have a limestone bedrock, and then we have the soil that forms from the rising and falling of seas. So that sand settles on the limestone bedrock. So we have a limestone bedrock, then we have sand on top from, ebbing and flowing for millennia. And that's what we're trying to garden in, is really, really sandy soil. So our soil development's a little bit different in that the sea has had so much to do with our soils. All right, so I wanted to show you some of the most common soils in the state because I think it's actually pretty interesting, and it kind of helps you realize why some of the native plants grow well in these types of situations. So spodosol is our state soil, and because it makes up most of the land. So we actually have a state soil. You can impress your friends at the next party you go to and tell them that you know the state soil and it's a spodosol. But no, they're probably going to look at you kind of crazy, right? But anyhow, the orange that you see here is the spodosol, and spodosols typically form under pine. They have this really white or bleached out horizon, and then they have a lot of clay sometimes and heavy accumulation of minerals into those lower horizons. And then they have a little bit of topsoil, and a lot of that is influenced by pine needles and some of the vegetation from the pine forest. So other soil types that we have, and this is the soil type that's common in Lake County, we have the Lake Wales Ridge. So we have to garden in excessively drained sands, and that is represented by that dark green that you see there. So entosols are excessively drained sands. Another interesting soil we have in Florida is the histosol, and you'll see that in the bright green. That is muck soils. So you see it close to the Everglades, you see it close to a lot of lakes and water bodies. So those are muck soils. They've got a lot of organic matter compared to the rest of a lot of Florida soils. And so another interesting soil, I think we don't really deal with it too much in the central Florida part of the state, but those folks in the panhandle might, and that's the ultisols. So these can actually have clay accumulation from the Appalachian Mountains. So, but we're not gardening in that type of situation. You know, I just showed you a spodosol, the most common soil type in Florida that formed for millennia under pine forest. Well, what we do during the development process is we grade the land. Well, actually, first of all, what we do is we strip all vegetation and we put it into piles and we burn it. We've probably all seen that traveling around the state of Florida. Then we come through and we remove topsoil or shift topsoil, and we grade the land. And what happens during that process is that we are typically will bring up subsoil from below, and we will grade that. Sometimes the topsoil is incorporated and mixed into that subsoil. Sometimes it's moved to a different location. So you might be gardening in subsoil that was used to dig out a retention pond, and that was, who knows, maybe 8, 10, 15 feet below the topsoil. And now you're trying to garden and grow native plants in that. So then what we do towards the end of the development process is the house is built, right? And then we go and we put sod down, and then we plant, you know, the 1 or 2 trees that we have to have, and we plant some foundation plants around the house. And so that's kind of, and either the homeowner takes care of it or the HOA takes care of it, but we're really just not setting these landscapes up for success. So urban soils, actually, I think there's about 9,000 soil types in the world, and urban soils are their own soil type. And the definition is a soil material having a non-agricultural man-made surface layer of greater than 20 inches thick, and it's produced by mixing, filling, or contamination. So there is actually a definition for urban soils. And I just took a walk around a new neighborhood that was going in near my neighborhood. And that's where you see the picture on the left. This pretty house here, and we've got, it looks like a subsoil layer. It looks like there's actual almost like play sand in bags, and then you have like a builder sand that's brought in. And then you even, if you can make it out, you even have a dumpster that's been on site too. So wherever that dumpster is located, there's probably a lot of compaction and compression. So the soil can be really dense in that area. So this person's going to have a tough time growing a landscape in that type of condition. The picture on the right is actually a picture of the research plots where I'm working. And you can see this is actually right where my research plots are planted. And we had all this heavy equipment parked there. And so that heavy equipment just squeezes out the pore space, and it compacts that soil, and again, makes it very difficult to grow. And at first I was upset when I saw this. I thought, oh my goodness, our research plots are going to go right here, and all this heavy equipment's parked there. And I thought, you know what? This is actually a good situation, because now we know how these native plants are going to grow in some of the worst types of situations. So I've touched on soil compaction. What happens is our soil is made out of 50% mineral and 50% pore space. There's usually a little bit of organic matter in there, but in Florida, it's only 1%. So sometimes even less than that, but it all depends on where you live. So we've got, let's just say we have 50% pore space, 50% mineral. So we come along and we compact the soil and we press all of that pore space. Well, that's where the water and the air is supposed to go. So if we compact that pore space, our water cannot infiltrate down into the soil. So we get what we call high bulk density. And you can think of that as how dense the soil is, and it can really impede root growth. and we can get high pHs because we're gardening now in the subsoil. So it's not uncommon to get a pH of 7.8 to 8. And if you all remember the pH scale, 7 is neutral, and then we get below 7, it's acidic. We get above 7 and it's alkaline. Plants like to grow at around 6.5 pH, most plants, but it all depends. So we're looking at pHs that are way too alkaline for positive plant growth. And then we get reduced biological activity too. And so also another thing that happens is, we need this pore space so that the water can infiltrate either through rain or through irrigation. And when we irrigate, sometimes that rain will just, or that irrigation will just wash right into the street because our soils are so compacted they can't take in the rainwater. So not a good situation. So, this situation and, this love of nature, this love of ornamental landscapes that I have has led me to study this native plants and urban soils project. And I'd like to tell you about it. So this is near the Sunbridge development it's near the Osceola, Orange County border, south of the airport, close to Lake Nona. And so the developer came to the University of Florida and they said, we want to do as reduced irrigation as possible. And so can you help us figure out how to do this? And, they also wanted to make this development have a sustainable message or sustainable look to it. So they were also interested in native plants. So we partnered with this developer and we partnered with, Cherry Lake Tree Farm, which is a large nursery, Life Soils, which is a compost company. The Nature Conservancy is even helping us out with this project as well. There's a whole lot of players involved. So we developed this experiment. And what you're looking at here is you're looking at a snapshot. Across the street, you'll see a typical development, which is Del Webb. It's a 55+ retirement community. And this green patch that you see in the middle of the screen with the circle around it, that's what we call base camp. This is where the sales office is for this development. They're actually these very stylish yurts. And then you can see our landscape, which is right where all that heavy equipment was parked. And this is our demonstration site. So what we thought we would do is, usually when you do an experimental design, you're not really particularly worried about how it works. But we want people to walk through this. We want it to be a feature of this base camp, and we want to educate people with this feature. So we needed to double a research experiment with a garden type setting. So our goals were to reduce water needs in the landscape. We wanted to support biodiversity. We wanted to alter urban soils by adding compost to try to improve the plant health and the soil conditions. And again, we wanted this experiment to double as a garden feature. So we've been able to give tours in the experiment, and we've been able to collect data from it as well. And then you see an aerial photo here, and then our landscape design of the experimental site. So what we're hoping to capture, or what I've been capturing, I should say, is the visual quality. I'm actually rating plants. The soil quality, we're sending them off, soil samples off to a lab to be analyzed. We're looking at pest and disease pressure. So I go out there and scout the native plants to see if, if our treatments, which I'll get into in just a minute, are impacting the amount of pests and diseases that we have. And then towards the end of the study, I'm going to look at plant survivorship. How many of these native plants did survive in this type of situation? We're actually also looking at coverage and growth too. The plots are very large compared to a typical experimental design. They're 600 square foot each. All right, so our treatments that we're doing water as needed. So this is only when our landscaper or our landscape manager, I should say, his name's Jimmy, he might even be on here today from Cherry Lake, when he deems that these plants need some irrigation. We're starting to see some wilting, we're starting to see some water stress going on. So we turn the water on for water as needed. And then we have scheduled irrigation, which we determined was going to be once a week. So a lot of homeowners probably irrigate closer to twice a week with their landscapes, but we went for a once a week because the soil in this area tends to hold some moisture already. And then we did compost amendments on half of the plots. And then we just have our urban only soil on the other half of the plots. And we actually took a tiller to all the plots because we wanted to make sure and to see if it's the compost that's actually working or if it's the tilling process that is. So all the plots were tilled prior to planting. Why did we go in with this drip irrigation? It's a more efficient way to irrigate, and it's a way the industry is going. It delivers the water close to the root system of the plant, and you don't get so much misting off of that irrigation, and it gets directly where it needs to go. Why do we do compost? Well, there is a lot of agricultural research on how increasing the rates of compost helps reduce the density of the soil and how it helps roots to grow. And then it helps increase those pores, those soil pores, porosity, so that we can have some water and some oxygen getting into that soil, and the infiltration rate as well. So it helps that water filter into the soil. And then, really, I don't think we pay enough attention to the amount of nutrients that compost can provide to us. But the compost has to be composted correctly with the right balance of ingredients of carbon and nitrogen to be beneficial as far as nutrients go. And that's really a topic for a whole nother class. But if you have some composting questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A and I'll attempt to answer them. All right, so we went with 26 different native plant species. We went with some of the tried and true that you see out in the landscape all the time, like Gulf muhlygrass. We also went with Yaupon holly, which is a very common landscape plant because they're just so versatile and they're so tough. But what I like about it is we also went with some other species as well. So we went with button rattlesnake master, which is, wow, a fabulous pollinator plant and a very unusual look. And so I'm really enjoying seeing that plant out there in the landscape. We also went with Atlantic St. John's wort as well. So that was another one that was a newer native plant to me that I don't see a lot in the landscape nursery industry. But anyhow, so 26 different native plants that are commonly found at native plant nurseries was our plant palette. So what I do when I go out to these plots is I rate the visual quality. And this is my kind of science because all I'm doing is rating the visual quality on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 meaning the plant is dead but still intact. 10 meaning that that plant just looks absolutely beautiful. It's got nice full coverage all the way around. It's a nice deep dark green. Maybe it's blooming profusely. So that would be a 10. So 5 is actually a critical point on the scale. If we have below 5, that means that it's not marketable for the nursery industry, but over 5 means 5 and over means that it could be marketed. Someone would be willing to buy that plant if it was, at a nursery. So that's how we have developed this. It's really being adapted from the way that they do rate plants in the nursery industry and the way they rate turf grasses as well. So we're just taking it and applying it to native plants. So this is what we found out so far. This was from last year. I went out spring of 2022, summer of 22, and fall of 22. And what we found is that the compost really maintained that visual quality. And so if you'll direct your attention to the picture in the bottom right, that's Elliott's lovegrass. And you can see a nice side-by-side comparison of the no compost treatment with the compost treatment. So if I was going to visually rate this using my rating system, the turf grass and nursery industry mashup, if you will, I would probably give the no compost maybe a 5. I think it's marketable. I think somebody would buy it if it was in a pot. It's, full, but it's compact. It looks okay. It looks good. But I would give the one with the compost treatment probably an 8. So you can see it's really nice and full. Who knows, maybe even a 9. Really nice and full, and it's got this nice fall color to it. So that's, again, my kind of science, very, very simple. And I've even tested other people to see if they would come up with the same rating system as me, and we really do. So that's been interesting to see. All right, so the trend that we're seeing is when I first went out there and these plants were first installed, they all had a visual, if we looked at all the plants in a whole plot, they had a visual quality of about 6.5, a little bit over. But and compost is in the red that you see there, and our no compost plots is in the blue. And on the side, the y-axis, we have our visual quality. So again, spring 2022, they were about the same visual quality. Summer 2022, we started to see them differentiate. So that compost treatment maintained a higher visual quality than the no compost treatment. And the no compost treatment started to fall off. So it's actually in between 5.5 and 6 during the summer. And then it starts to decrease and become even more variable in fall of 2022. So, you can see that trend. I have gone out and collected data in spring of 23 and summer of 23, but I've yet to analyze it. So hopefully I can get some of that information out soon and we can see if that trend continues. But based on what I'm seeing in the plots, just from taking pictures and going out there, I'm starting to see this trend really differentiate. So, and here's some pictures. This was from a data collection that I did in March. So this is on the left, you will see the worst case scenario. We have as needed irrigation, meaning we're only turning it on when the plants are showing signs of wilting or stress. And then it's also without compost. Compare that same day, I took this picture on the same day, to the plot on the right, which is weekly irrigation with compost. So this is the worst and best case scenario. Again, we have as needed irrigation without compost, weekly irrigation with compost. Here's where it gets interesting. This on the left, I'm sorry, hang on a minute. This is July of 23. We have as needed irrigation without compost on the left. So again, worst type of situation. Weekly irrigation with compost on the right. So again, that's the best situation as far as plant health, plant growth goes. Here's where it gets interesting. All right, so when we started looking at weekly irrigation without compost, it actually looks worse than as needed irrigation with compost. So I'll say that again, our treatments that have weekly irrigation without compost actually have less plant visual quality than our as needed irrigation with compost. So what is this telling me? This is telling me that we could reduce our water use by adding compost to our landscapes, at least in this type of situation. Here's just another picture that I took of July. Again, this is weekly. On the left, it's weekly irrigation without compost. So we're watering these things every week. And then on the right, we have as needed irrigation with compost. So a lot less water use when we are incorporating that compost. And this is July of 23. So let's tease apart our water use a little bit more. We actually were able to get exact readings from, I believe, a water flow meter from our partners with Cherry Lake. So our water use for 1 year in our as needed irrigation is 12,208 gallons. We did apply 14 times, and I do need to stress that this was all within a 2-week period. And this was when we were going, so this was every day for 2 weeks. We were just trying to re-wet that soil, rehydrate it, if you will, because it had gotten so hydrophobic. It was just repelling the water. So this was in March when we were really droughty. That's the only time we've irrigated the as needed plots. The once a week irrigation, we've used 56,760 gallons of water. Again, that's once a week on a regular schedule. So the as needed irrigation saved 82% water use. All right, so those are the results that we're seeing so far. Now I'd like to get into some of our top performing plants that we're seeing. Some of you are not going to be surprised by these, but these are plants that performed well in no compost treatments and compost treatments. So one is the tried and true Gulf muley grass. I like to stress to folks that it does bloom in the fall, so refrain from pruning it this time of year. Some of the municipalities will have this planted in road medians and utility type areas, and then they will prune it right about this time of year before it blooms. But anyhow, this plant looked great whether it had compost or no compost. It did perform better in the compost treatments that had a deeper, darker color and more blooms. So keep that in mind, but it was a really, really tough plant that's just performed well throughout this experiment. It has a very extensive root system. It can get a mealybug that can be problematic. So if we plant too much Gulf muhly grass, we might encourage this a spread of this mealybug. So we want to plant it, but we want to plant things thoughtfully. And just like we want to avoid monocultures, that's planting the same type of plant in mass. Throughout our landscapes, we want to avoid monocultures here as well, even with native plants. So we want a lot of plant diversity in our landscapes to avoid pest problems, because natives can still get pests too. So Elliott's lovegrass is another one that I was really impressed with. That's the grass that you see that's low, and it has like this white bloom, white to purplish bloom on it in the fall. And it has a nice rust color in the fall. The leaves does as well. So it's a perennial bunch grass. It blooms in the fall. The small seeds are used for birds, and it's actually host to a skipper butterfly too. So it really performs well in moist to dry soils, and it can take our well-drained sandy soils. So for me, being in Lake County, where we're on the Lake Wales Ridge and we have these excessively drained sands, I'm always looking for plants that can take really, really dry conditions. I also, me personally, I do not have an irrigation system, so it's always a bonus when I can find a drought-tolerant plant. Starry rosinweed, I think this plant is very underutilized. It looked great. I don't think the ratings ever dipped below a 5 for that visual quality, no matter if we had compost or not compost or how we were irrigating. This plant has just looked great every single time I've been out to collect this data. So it flowers summer, fall, and even into the winter. It's one of those disc and ray flowers. It really supports the pollinators, lots of different species of pollinators as well. It can take dry to moist soils. And the literature says that it will get 3 to 12 feet. I think 12 feet's a little excessive. I mostly see it around 3 to 4 foot, but I have seen it around 5-6 foot too, but it's usually maintained around 4 foot tall when it really gets growing. And it is a perennial too, which is another reason why I enjoy it. You don't have to replant it every year, and it will reseed for you. Dotted horsemint. Oh, wow. This one's great for the pollinators. If that is one of your main goals, I would encourage you to plant this plant. It blooms late spring, summer into the fall. It will start to get leggy around the fall months. It can take very dry soils, and it attracts pollinators by the droves. We actually received a Florida Wildflower Foundation grant at the Sumter County Extension Office years ago, and we planted pollinators, and we ordered them in gallon-sized pots because at the time of year we were planting, we could not even get the plants out of the truck when the landscaper delivered them to us without there being pollinators all over the dotted horsemint. So I am sold on this plant. It's been fabulous. All right, so this is just a picture of the plots. This was, I believe, last September time period. And just to show you some variety, we see the Elliott's lovegrass. This is right before it gets that really beautiful white bloom, but it still has this nice rusty fall color. And then back behind it is the dotted horsemint this dotted horsemint more has a white to its leaves too. And I think these blooms are a little bit older. So, but I just thought that was a nice planting. Another great plant is frog fruit. This has performed well throughout the study. I will say that it does look better. We do have more growth, darker, greener growth on the frog fruit that is in the compost plots. It's a little bit more sparse on the plots that do not have compost. But overall, it has performed well. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir with some of these plant recommendations. It can be a good alternative turf. It could be a great ground cover for an area where you just want something that's low, moist to moderately dry soil, full sun to part shade. You can propagate it by cuttings. And it's also a host plant to the Phaon crescent, the common buckeye, and the white peacock butterfly. So you'll see when I go out to the plots, I told you I looked at pest and disease presence. I also look at herbivory too. So I look at the amount of chewing in the leaves. And I actually want to see chewing in the leaves. And this is very different than the way that we typically think of landscaping. We don't want something feeding on our plants with typical ornamental landscapes. But in this case, since I'm trying to support a food web here, I do want to see some chewing on my plants. So it's a totally different thought process. And I often see a lot of chewing on the plants from some of these larvae from these butterfly. And I think that's a score. So this is just frog fruit in the front of this plant. This is an all native landscape that's growing, and this is actually in the Villages area. So they do every so often, the Native Plant Society there will do a tour of native plant homes in the Villages, and it's excellent. It's a lot of fun to go see and check out what these folks are doing in a relatively strict HOA type community. So, but what I want to draw your attention to is the frog fruit in the foreground here. And sometimes people will ask me, if I'm doing a turf replacement, what is your advice when approaching these HOAs? And sometimes these HOAs will say, you can't have the ground cover be more than 8 inches tall. So they're not so concerned sometimes with exactly what it needs to be, but they want it to be a continuous look that's maintained at a certain height. So I think that's why they were able to get away with frog fruit in the Villages situation. Sunshine mimosa is another one that has performed really well. I don't think this plant has scored below a 7 on our visual quality scale. It can take full sun and part shade. It offers, I would say, seasonal coverage. In the summertime, it can get outcompeted with weeds if you have a weed seed bank there. And in the wintertime, it can die back if we get a frost or freeze. But in the spring, early summer, and even into the fall, it can look really, really nice. So this can be a nice ground cover. We planted it so that it would be a legume. So it would hopefully fix some nitrogen from the atmosphere and help bring that into our plots. Because our goal is also not to fertilize these plots in these urban soils. So this performs well when droughty. I would say that initially to install it, you need to do some weed management. It is, I would like to call it an aggressive native. If you're going to plant it as a lawn, you better make sure that you're out there maintaining it, or that your neighbor is also happy with it. So is it mobile? Yes, but it's not always necessary if you have good weed control. Another plant that I have been very happy with is the Atlantic St. John's wort. This blooms June through September, and it can take very dry conditions. It has performed beautifully in both the no compost treatment and the compost treatment. So it has performed better in the compost treatment, but it's, performed pretty well in the non-compost treatment. So it takes sandy soils, full sun, 1 to 2 feet tall, and about that wide as well. And it gets these beautiful yellow blooms. But I really like this plant even when it's not blooming, because it forms this dense, thick, compact habit, this growth habit to it. So some other recommendations I have that are moving us away towards plants based on just what we're seeing so far with this experiment is that with fertilization and compost. So there's still a lot we don't know. Our goal is to not fertilize these plots, these plantings. We're trying to see if we can put this compost down. We want to see how long the effects are going to last. Does it impact the visual quality, which we already know that it does for the first year. And I am pretty sure my data is going to show that it's going to show that for the second year as well. Will it last 5 years? Will it last 7 years? Will it put these landscapes on a trajectory to where all we have to do is incorporate compost once? And, if we can put some pine straw mulch down or some other biodegradable type mulch, that it will help continue that soil building process. So those are things we still don't know. I would say based on the research that I've done so far is most of our plants, generally speaking, are performing better on the plants where we incorporated the compost. The compost was put down at 4 cubic yards per 1,000 square feet. So we put roughly 1 inch down and tilled it into the top 4 inches of the soil. So, but, again, the goal is we want to get away from some of those fertilizers. We want to just to be able to help build a healthy soil there. The compost and fertilization requirements of some of these native plants, it's all going to depend on the prior use of the land and the development process, and it's going to depend on the different species. Hopefully a lot of these native wildflower species and other native grass species don't really require a lot of fertility anyhow. All right, so just some general recommendations on compost. Just looking through some of the agricultural literature, because there's not a lot of literature on growing native plants with compost. The advice is to incorporate about 1/3 of the volume to be compost of like a planting bed. That's a lot. I would say if you can put an inch down and work it into the top 4 inches of the soil, it's going to help, or, depending on your soil type. So, but a question that we get frequently, and I think it's a very important question, because compost still is a fertilizer and it could still leach nitrogen and it could still leach nutrients. So we don't know, using this application, how much it will leach. So that's another study that needs to be conducted. All right, so some other recommendations I have for you is, just for the landscapes, is determine your goals. Do you want your native plants to provide drought tolerance for you, or do you have a wet area in your yard and you need a native plant that's going to be able to take those types of conditions? Are you wanting to attract wildlife because there's specific natives that you may want to attract to, or plant to attract specific types of wildlife there too? And then, do you want to maintain versus a natural look? Native plants really lean themselves more towards a natural look. And so you don't want to plant things in nice, neat, straight lines, unless that's what you like. You want to do, more of a naturalistic type planting, where you have these plants kind of mixed and you have some planted in mass. So think about the type of look that you want to create. You can also do a lot of interesting things with hardscapes too, to make those native plants look more maintained as well. That's the look you're going after. I would also say that you need to soil test. You need to know where your soil currently stands before you start selecting plants. We recommend that with all of our plants, not just native plants. So any of our other ornamental horticulture plants, we recommend doing that soil test. That way you know where you stand, and if you do need to amend your soil, or if there's any other steps you might need to take. Another situation that we can get into too is with some of these developments, we're using reclaimed water, and reclaimed water can have fertilizer salts in the reclaimed water. And so sometimes we might have some issues with salts in our soil. So you could always get a test for that as well. But there's some different schools of thoughts with this, building these soils for native plants. I had the pleasure of hearing Thomas Rayner speak last year at the Outside Collaborative, and he is the co-author of a book called Planting in a Post-Wild World. And I talked to him briefly after his session, and he has a totally different mindset than what we have had on this project. He says, select plants for the soil conditions that you have. If you have a crummy soil and it has a really low pH, select plants that like that, lack of fertility in the soil, and that can take a really low pH. So you might need to do some research if that's the way you want to go. And so the way he did his plantings, which I thought were quite lovely, and they really do mimic nature, is he would take plugs of different plants. So a plug could be maybe an inch by an inch, something about that size. And they can be quite long too, depending on the tray that the nursery grower is used. So instead of growing things in a gallon pot and putting it in the ground, or growing it by seed, they would use plugs, and they would plug like these meadows into the landscapes, which I think again are quite lovely. But he had a totally different mindset, so it was very interesting to talk to him. So do we alter the soils to help more of our generalist native plants, or do we select native plants that just thrive on crummy soils anyway? So that's just a different thought process. What I would like to do is open it up for questions, but I want to plug the Outside Collaborative. Oh, and I need to tell you one more thing that we found with our experiment too. But the Outside Collaborative is a group of landscapers, nursery growers, landscape architects. There's some builders, developers involved. There's professors involved. There's students. So and homeowners and native plant members, society members, and the Florida Wildflower Foundation was there. And so was the Nature Conservancy. So we're all getting together to try to figure out how to grow these urban landscapes to protect our water resources and to bring in wildlife and support that food web. Another thing I did not mention earlier in this talk is that when we also partnered with UCF. So I'm looking at the soil conditions. UCF is looking at the amount of pollinators present. So what they found on the plots with compost is that the amount of blooms doubled, and then the amount of pollinators also came close to doubling as well. So that's what they found with their first data collection. So what's really cool about that is we're seeing something that we call in ecology a bottom-up effect. something that we are doing at the soil level is impacting possibly higher food webs, because we're bringing in these pollinators now that birds will feed on, and other types of wildlife. So I think it's really cool that we actually have a study now that's showing that effect, the soil level improving the amount of blooms and the amount of pollinator visits. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. Are there any, plants that you think are just, can really tolerate these urban soils? Any other questions or thoughts that you have? I'd like to give it a go and see if we can answer some of those.
Thanks, Brooke. We've got quite a few questions. We have lots of compost questions, so I'm going to start there, if that's okay. What kind of compost are you using? And is it something that the average homeowner can get?
Okay, so we are partnering with a company called Life Soils, and they, I believe that their compost, their base is actually from horse bedding, horse manure. And so that's what they use as their base. I believe you can purchase it from them. If you wanted to install a large landscape, you could purchase it from them, but they also, I think, are getting into the retail market where they're going to start to sell bags of their compost. But, and Life Soils has been a partner with us through this project, but there's other composts that can be very effective as well. So.
And well, that was my next question. So how do you know, I guess, is the question of if you're getting the right ratio of carbon to nitrogen, or if you're purchasing another product to amend your soil?
I would ask the compost company, and hopefully they'll be a straight shooter with you. I believe there is like a compost, and Mark Singleton might be on this call. He works with Life Soils, and so he might be able to answer through the Q&A possibly. But I believe there is like a compost standard association, like the compost has to meet a certain standard, and there's like an inspection process if it's going to be bagged and sold like that. So I can't remember the exact name of that association, but maybe he could type it into the Q&A for us. So, and hey, if you want to get that soil checked too, we can, you can actually send it off for a soil test as well, and we can see the carbon nitrogen ratio is what you're looking for. So
we'll make sure that those, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
I was just going to say, we'll make sure that those links are in the resources that we send out, the Life Soils information, the soil test, and all the things that people are asking about in the Q&A.
Sure.
And as far as applying the soil, you mentioned just adding about an inch of it and working it into the soil. Is it really that simple to just kind of mix it in with your existing soil?
Yeah, with landscapes, what you want to avoid doing is you want to make sure that you avoid putting it in a hole. So say you're planting a tree or a shrub, you don't want to take out a hole and then plant the compost, put the compost directly in it and then put the tree in it, because that's almost going to act like a pot within a pot. And sometimes what will happen is the dry, sandy soil from outside of that compost will actually wick water away from that root ball. So that's why it's so very important that you put your compost down in a layer and you work it into that soil, and you work it, you really work it into that soil.
Well, and if I can ask a personal question here as we're talking about it, I've been told that I have hydrophobic soil, like you water the plants and the water just sits on top. Doesn't really penetrate down. And I've heard that adding clay soil or sand will alleviate that. Is that something you would recommend, or is it still more of a, compost is going to be the better amendment in that situation?
I think compost is going to have some other added benefits for you. So I think it could possibly provide you with, a better nutritional balance than just, incorporating a clay. And so I think that's probably a better way to go. I have heard that, but I don't know. I don't have a great answer for you, to be honest, Stacy, but I would go lean more towards compost than I would adding a clay. Because you could get that clay could settle out too, and you could get a hard pan of clay going on in your soil over time.
Yeah.
I would think.
So there are a couple of questions about the test plots, if people can visit them. And I know we've gone out there with the outside collab. Is that something that the general public can visit? And can we share that information?
Yes, you can. So I'm making some notes of things that I need to share. So they are open from 10 to 6 every day. And it is in the Sunbridge. It's, if you looked up the Sunbridge sales office, which I can send that information, you can go out there anytime and check out those plots.
Great. We can again include that in the resources that we send out. We do have a question about tilling. You mentioned that the soil is generally tilled in the developments. Is tilling bad for soil organisms?
Yeah, I think it could be more of your macroorganisms, your larger organisms. I think it could be. So, you know, with these development type soils, these urban soils, the land has been degraded so much. And what we typically find in these urban development soils is we find less diversity of soil organisms, but sometimes we'll find higher rates of, say, nematodes. I remember working on a project with that with my undergraduate studies, where we actually saw a lot less diversity of arthropods, but a lot higher diversity of nematodes. So you're in these urban soils, your soil's already devoid of a lot of life, I hate to say. I mean, there is some life there, but it's not what a typical topsoil would be. So I would say at that stage, but yeah, you wouldn't want to till on a regular basis, that's for sure. So I think if you're in this, if you're redoing your landscape and you just have this, you know, really hydrophobic soil, or, you know, just these really poor soil conditions, you could, you know, till that soil in initially with that compost. And then after that, if you needed to add additional compost over time, you could top dress with it. I would like to also point out that this study was done on soils that hold more water than a lot of our excessively drained sand soils. So we might have some different results on excessively drained sands. It might break down faster. I don't know. We don't know. So it's another study that needs to be performed.
And will you be testing the soil in the future to see if the native plants have improved it, or do you anticipate the native plants to contribute to the soil health?
So what we're doing we are testing the soil twice a year. I'm pulling samples and we're going to look at carbon. We're going to look at nitrogen. We're going to look at, oh goodness, I'm trying to think, some, I believe phosphorus as well. And then we're pulling the bulk density, and then we're trying to see how much soil that water can hold. But I don't know, because of our plantings, the way we designed it, we wanted it to be naturalistic. So we have lots of native plants. It is designed, but you know, you might have Elliott's lovegrass right next to sunshine mimosa, right next to Yopon holly. And I don't know that we could differentiate that in that type of setting. There might be a way, but we're not doing it with this study. That's getting really detailed with the 26 different plant species that we have.
And how long is your study going to last?
I would like to take it out at least another year. Most studies last for about 2 years, but we're still seeing an effect from the compost, I believe. And so I'd like to take it out another year past this to see.
Is that how long the UCF study will that kind of go simultaneously?
You know, they may only be doing it 2 years. So I'm not, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure. We've got so many different students working on this. So we have another student that is looking at ground dwelling beetles from UCF. We have students from UCF that are looking at pollinator diversity and abundance. And then we also have another student that's in my lab with UF, and she's going to be comparing ground dwelling arthropods, so insects and other organisms. She's going to be comparing that with Del Webb, which is the neighborhood across the street, which is a more traditional landscape, versus the landscape plantings at this Sunbridge development. And actually, let's see, well, I'm going to back up and show you one of the model homes real quick in this development. Let's see, because I think you'll find it. It was on my very first slide. I didn't talk a lot about this. So let me see if I can share this real quick. There's a lot of questions in the chat box. All right, so this was in my title slide. This is the plantings at Sunbridge. So they are doing, you know, what is typically done in developments where they go in and they grade the land and they remove the vegetation, that type of thing. But this is where they're, these are the model homes. So they're putting in, like, it looks like they have Coreopsis leavenworthii, and that's the yellow flowering plant there. It looks like they have Hamelia, which is a fire bush in the foreground, although I will tell you one of the situations that they've had is trying to find native plants in this massive quantity. And so sometimes things are getting subbed out that are not what it was originally spec'd for. So that's not what was originally selected. Like, I'm not sure that this firebush is actually our native firebush. This might be the dwarf firebush that you see in this picture. So it's one of those things where, are things being done perfectly? No. Are we trying? Yes. So, you know, I think we're making progress. We're learning as we go. This is the only development I know of that has this focus in this push for their landscapes. There might be others. So someone else asked in the share asked, I always wondered why can't developers not completely clear the land and leave some of the forest trees. It is possible, but this is an area, to be honest, I don't know a lot about. I did see a community in Gainesville that was built with stem wall construction, and they were able just to go in and clear the footprint of the house and build the house there. The name of the neighborhood, it's escaped me. Anyway, it starts with an M. It's in Gainesville, and they did stem wall construction. So when you walk through this neighborhood, it's like you're walking through the woods. And they have a little bit of minimal landscape in the front, and then the rest of the lot is wooded. So it can be done. There's probably reasons I don't understand just because I'm not in that construction business, but I would like to learn more about low impact development as I go along. But yeah, it can be done, but I think it's more complicated, maybe more expensive too, I imagine.
I just want to, I know we're coming up against time, but there are a couple of questions about plant selection, and I think I can roll them into one. When you were selecting plants, was it based on any particular, was it based on plants that you knew or hoped would react to the type of soil you were dealing with, or was there another intention to it? And with that too, someone asked about planting for our the areas we live in. This one was someone who lives on a barrier island, but given that these soils are being trucked into our developments, does it even make sense to think about that in terms of plant selection for our landscape?
That's a great question. I don't know if I have a great answer for that one either, because the soils are just, they're not natural. So, you know, for us as folks that, you know, want to grow more natives, we're trying to take a native plant and put it in a very non-native situation, you know. That's a quandary. That's a really tough question. I don't really know how to answer it. You know, I would think in a coastal situation, you got to think of probably more salt water and irrigation, if you have irrigation, or just more salt exposure from the wind and the environment. So I would definitely select plants that can take, you know, I would select native plants that are for that coastal area. I mean, I still would try to do that. And with the plants that we, you know, selected for this area is next to a pine flatwoods. I think the soil holds more moisture than is typical in most probably developments in Central Florida, especially in my area where it's just excessively drained sand. I mean, it's so sandy. That, you know, we did try to think about plants that might be able to take it a little bit on the wet side. And actually some of the plants, I didn't get into the plants that failed because I was trying to keep it all, you know, these are the plants that worked great. Some of the plants that we saw that failed was lobelia cardinalis, I think is how you say. It's a beautiful red blooming lobelia. So I thought we might be pushing it because it seems like it's more of a wetlands plant, but we still thought, well, these soils do hold some moisture, so let's try it. So we did try to take site conditions into consideration, but I think another big issue we had is we were just trying to go to native plants that we could find in large quantity that were available in the industry.
Yeah, that's a whole other webinar.
I know it is, isn't it?
Availability.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for your time today and this great information. The questions that we didn't get to, we do capture them, and we can pass those on to Brooke and get some answers as well. But we will be sending out the resources and the recording link tomorrow with all the different things we've talked about today, where to get your soil tested, information about live soils, the Sunbridge address, and I'm sure there's other things I'm forgetting that we will include. So thank you again, Brooke. We really appreciate this. It's great information.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it. It's definitely different, so that's for sure.
All right, well, thanks everyone. Keep an eye on our socials and our website for next month's webinars and field trips. And thanks for being here. Bye-bye.